Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, returning guest Jessica Plummer joins me to discuss Wonder Woman 1984. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over, but hopefully by now is no longer Christmas ads. Hello and welcome back. I'm Matthew. As I said, I'm joined again by Jessica. Jessica has been a regular guest talking to me about the history of comic books and a number of different movies and TV shows, especially in the DC-verse. And so, Jessica, I am so excited to have you back for Wonder Woman 84. The minute I saw this movie was coming out, I knew you were the one I wanted to get on. So, how are we doing today?
I'm doing good. I am wearing a Wonder Woman shirt, and I am ready to discuss.
Awesome. So, let's give just some background. I know you're very deep into DC comics. I mean, you're with comics in general, but especially DC. I don't think you and I got to talk about the first Wonder Woman movie. And so I'd love to hear just a bit about kind of your feelings about the character in general and about the first Wonder Woman movie and how she's been portrayed in other movies like Justice League and BVS, and kind of sort of what you're feeling about this character going into WW84.
Sure. I to be honest, I'm not like a super hardcore Wonder Woman fan in general. I do like her. Like I enjoy her. I have dipped in and out of her comics basically since I started reading comics, but never like super religiously picking them up. But I am fond of the character. I'm certainly not, a deep in the weeds expert, on which I probably should have warned you about before I agreed to do this, but you've got me, the fraud.
If expertise was a fundamental part of this podcast, we would have stopped a number of episodes ago. It's about fans with opinions and some insight.
I do have opinions. I have so many opinions. But yeah, I do really enjoy Wonder Woman. And she's one of those characters who, I feel very strongly about what she means as the most prominent female superhero in existence and the most prominent female DC character, and that she should be treated on the same level with Batman and Superman, and very frequently is not.
Right.
As far as the first movie went, so I did not see, didn't see Batman v Superman, where she first appeared until years after it had come out. So I didn't see her first clip in there, but everybody was like, oh, she's the only good thing about the movie. So I was cautiously optimistic about the first Wonder Woman movie. It's tough to be optimistic about DC movies because
there's been some problems, for sure.
By and large, they have not been great. And as you know, and as I have said on this podcast before, I also don't really like the Nolan movies. So there has not been a DC movie that I've enjoyed. It's basically Wonder Woman and Birds of Prey. There are parts of the old Superman movies that I like, but overall, it's basically Wonder Woman and Birds of Prey. So I was absolutely thrilled with that movie when it came out. I really, really love it. I know it's not perfect, but it's also one of those things where the minute it came out, everybody needed to dissect the ways in which it wasn't perfect in a way that they don't for the deeply flawed plot structure of, say, Captain America, Winter Soldier, or The Dark Knight, which everybody loves, but they got some problems. Again, I'm wearing a Wonder Woman shirt that literally says the line from the movie, "What I do is not up to you." I super, super enjoyed that movie. And then upon watching Batman v Superman and Justice League, she was indeed the only good thing about those movies. Well, no, I like the other little kids in Justice League. But yeah, so I had high hopes going into this.
I love The Flash, but I definitely agree with the overall point you're making.
Yeah. And Cyborg, Ray Fisher did a fantastic job with the quarter of his face he was allowed to use.
Yeah, that's true. I think I had a similar perspective. Wonder Woman was a character who I loved the Linda Carter show growing up. That was kind of right in my wheelhouse when I was a kid, and also, 10-year-old boy, Pretty Woman kicking butt. This is all the things I'm supposed to be enjoying. And I really loved the development of the character in the Justice League TV shows, especially.
Yeah.
I really loved, I think that show especially really gave the idea of, the triad, the triumvirate of her, Batman, and Superman. And that she's not just like the pretty girl who hangs out with them, that she has a very important role as kind of this fulcrum balance point between Superman and Batman having very different perspectives on things. And so I went in loving the character for all those reasons, as well as being fascinated with her history. Professor Marston and the Wonder Women is one of my favorite movies. And I really liked that the first movie. And I think you said it well in terms of the way it was looked at. To me, it was a fantastic popcorn movie. There are movies that I love to really like dive into every single ounce and element of them. That first Wonder Woman movie didn't feel like a movie that was asking you to do that. It was saying, look, we're going to give you a great story, a lot of fun action, a lot of great costumes and sets, and a really fun way to spend a couple of hours eating popcorn and seeing amazing heroes, and do it in ways that challenge all the kind of gender assumptions you generally have about these things. And I thought that was great. And you're right, to me, you and I are a little different because I'm a huge fan of the Christopher Nolan movies, but I definitely have not been enjoying the Zack Snyder take on the DC up to this point. I have seen the director's cut of the Snyder version of Batman vs. Superman, and I do think it is much better. Still has some big problems, and just isn't the portrayal of Batman or Superman that I agree with, but it feels like a better movie to me in a lot of ways, but just not what I'm looking for. But Wonder Woman was definitely for me as well. I think that the one kind of real shining thing to come out of the DCEU. Since then, I've enjoyed some other things a lot more. Birds of Prey is my favorite, like you. I thought Shazam was actually quite good. But I was definitely looking forward to this as kind of like one more, okay, let's go back to the part of the DCU that so far I've most enjoyed, at least one of the parts. And I have to say, Wonder Woman 84 was kind of disappointing from that perspective. And so with all that, I'm kind of really curious to dive into what we thought of Wonder Woman 84. And I do want to be clear, we're not just going to do kind of a movie review. There've already been 2 great podcasts here on the Stranded Panda Podcast Network that have done that, both with Bingers Assemble and with DCEU. We're going to look at it more from an ethical perspective and look at the questions the movie raised and what they both asked and maybe what they didn't realize they were asking in some complaint ways we may well have, as well as maybe some good things we saw, to be sure. But we're also gonna we're 2 movie fans who love to talk about movies, so we'll also probably have some more kind of review type stuff. But so with all that, let's shift into this movie itself.
Well, I do want to just challenge something you said about the first one real quick, and I do think it's relevant to our discussion. But I agree with you that it's a very fun popcorn movie, but I don't think that that's all that it is. For me as a female viewer, I was really moved and inspired by the iconic scene of Diana crossing no man's land and seeing this female superhero with these, powerful moments and this getting these badass scenes. I mean, it's an action movie. Yes, it is a popcorn movie, but this was the first successful female-led superhero movie ever. Yeah. And then we got Captain Marvel, and Birds of Prey isn't really the same kind of movie. And so to see that, I think that there is value in doing a familiar formula with, as you alluded to, someone we don't normally see in that hero role. It's like I've been saying for years that Marvel has sort of given up innovating and they just make the same movie over and over again. It's always Iron Man over and over again, which is fine because Iron Man's a great movie and it's a flexible formula, but it would be innovative if they just stopped putting white guys in that role and did that same movie with people who look different from Robert Downey Jr. And so while I see what you're saying, and I didn't take that as you being dismissive of it in any way, I do think that the fact that it is this sort of ebullient action movie, but it is about a woman, does sort of elevate it because of how unique that is and how powerful that is.
No, thank you very much, because that's my fault for not better explaining what I meant, because I think my point, what I was trying to say was, and it's the morning and I haven't recorded in a long time, so thank you. I should be more careful about this, is that to me it's incredibly powerful, as you said, to have a popcorn movie, but without it being starring a man, with it being starring a woman and a woman hero. And then I think that it's, I mean, I think you just said it perfectly, because I think it is both. It's that it's not that you should be, because it's a popcorn movie, you dismiss the fact that a woman's in it. It's that to analyze it in that kind of frame by frame, let's look at every moment of the plot, and if it all fits together perfectly like an Oscar-winning movie should, not that Oscar-winning movies often do, but you know what I mean, it is an unfair and I think kind of misogynistic attack on the movie. I guess that's all I meant, but I think you're absolutely right, and I think you said better than I ever could, why it was so important to have that kind of a thing, and I think in the same way, like with Marvel, you're right, it often is that kind of formula, and then to do something like Black Panther, and to have that same kind of formula, but where it's a black-led movie and an entirely black world that's happening in and stuff like that, becomes so important. So yeah, thank you very much for making that. I think that was what I was going at, but you're right, I didn't get that point across at all. So with that then, how is your kind of overall take on this particular part of Diana Prince's journey?
I definitely agree with you that it was a bit disappointing. I watched it on the 27th, so by then I had heard, a few friends had watched it. I'd heard a few people going like, "Well, that was all right." So I didn't have super high expectations, and I watched it at my brother's house, and he was like, we were talking about this beforehand. He's also a really big DC fan, and he was like, "Look, my expectations for the first Wonder Woman were really, really low, and it was great. So just lower your expectations really hard."
That's fair,
but they were low because of the track record of DC, not because he didn't expect there to be a good Wonder Woman movie.
Right.
But yeah, I thought, honestly, like, I had fun watching it. I certainly wasn't like, oh, I'm bored, or oh, I'm upset by this, or I wish I wasn't watching this movie. Like, it was a perfectly enjoyable experience. But I spent a lot of it being like, all right. Okay. It's a bit of a mess. And it's a bit, we could talk about this more, I'd love to talk about this more, but I feel like the central plot line, the central hook of the plot felt very small scale in a lot of ways, and very sort of B movie. But we can talk about that at greater length.
Yeah. No, I think that's about where I was. I feel like there's kind of three different levels on which I want to talk about this movie. One is about the characters themselves and some of the decisions they make. Many of which I found pretty questionable in terms of the way that the movie set things up. And then the second, and I think a lot of those kind of like, they pulled me out of it in some ways. Because I agree, like, there's some gorgeous cinematography. I thought the whole sort of Olympiad type competition at the beginning of the movie was fantastically shot and beautifully done. If going a long way to kind of set up one particular point. Mm-hmm. But the character decisions, we talk a lot on this podcast about the importance of a good villain. And I'm a huge Pedro Pascal fan. I can't say that this version of Max Lord is really one. There was a lot of mustache twirling to come out of this particular villain in ways that were really kind of not what I'm normally looking for. And then also just the way this movie fits into the overall DCEU was one I'm really wrestling with. So I think we're gonna have a lot to talk about. Let's maybe just start by doing kind of character by character breakdowns. So let's start with Diana herself. How did you feel about how she was portrayed in this particular movie?
Mostly good. I think Gal Gadot is wonderful in the role. I was a little bit. Look, I loved the relationship between Diana and Steve Trevor in the first movie. It was beautiful and it was poignant. And I really enjoy them in the comics as well, and I think that they were poignant again in this one. But Diana's immortal, and like, the idea that 70 years have gone by and she, I mean, again, like you said, it raises questions about the whole DCEU, but it also, if we, it's one thing to set up, okay, here's this character who fought in World War One, and then she had her heart broken, and she sort of retreated to lick her wounds until she was needed once again, 100 years later, and that's fine if you set it up that way, because it doesn't require you to think too much about what happens in between. But when you
Right.
do think about it, it's like, well, she's immortal. He was always going to die well before her. She's
Mm-hmm.
70 years have gone by. She hasn't moved on at all. She hasn't processed anything. And she also, again, this sort of goes into like the issues that it raises with the whole DCEU, but like, why did she take out the costume again
Yeah.
for a mall robbery? Like, that doesn't seem so. I'm sorry, World War II, and honestly any number of genocides and wars and global crises that have happened between 1917 or 18, whenever the first movie ended, and 1984, none of those didn't feel like lifting a finger for any of those. But these guys stick up a jewelry store at some completely random mall, and all of a sudden Wonder Woman is back, and there's no insight into why she did that. Like, it just felt, I wanted, again, like, in a lot of ways, even though the scale of the movie by the end is global, it felt low stakes
Yeah.
for a lot of it.
I think that's a great way to put it. I'm really glad you specifically brought up World War II because, I liked the concept of the first movie. I liked the idea, and Ares is very clear that he doesn't cause war, but that he sort of whispers in the ears of humanity and causes humanity to go to their worst excesses. I thought the approach of sort of Germans evil, everyone else good and happy to World War I historiography was a little questionable, but fair enough. Popcorn movie. But it did leave me wondering, okay, if Ares pushes humanity towards its worst aspects of war, how is it that 19 years after Ares is destroyed, we have World War II? And I was like, that's an interesting historical question. And overall, kind of, I wanted to get, I think the way you put it is really good of, once you start asking the question of what's Diana been doing this whole time, you have to wonder, okay, well, what has she, how do we get from where she is at the end of Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman, to her in Batman vs. Superman, where she's very don't want to help unless I absolutely have to, and that doomsday is what makes her decide to do that. And I feel like this movie didn't address those questions in either historical direction. Because, like you said, yeah, she starts out in a, well, yeah, I'm helping out in malls, and if someone's getting attacked, I'm there to help. And at the end of the movie, it certainly again feels like she's in a I want to help place. I guess we're diving right into the DC stuff, but it didn't. I didn't feel like it grew her character in any way, or helped to make me better understand what happens between World War One and now the 2000 teens.
Yeah, no, it definitely, she didn't grow at all in this movie. And to be, I guess to be fair, that's sort of how superhero media is. Like, you have the origin story, and then they just keep doing the thing that they do forever. Like,
Right.
that I see a lot of frustration with, for example, Daredevil. With the TV show, because Matt kept making the same mistakes over and over again. And why isn't he just better? Well, because he can't be, because he's a mess, because that's who Daredevil is.
Yeah.
And so, why doesn't Batman ever, process his grief? Because he won't, because that's who Batman is. And so they are always, I've heard people say, superheroes are perpetually stuck in Act Two.
Right.
They never grow, and they never end, which is fine for comics, because they're shorter, smaller stories and they're serialized, but it feels weird to watch a whole movie and be like, well, that just reiterated exactly the points of the first one. but with breakdancing.
Yeah. I do think there have been some movies that have been able to do that. Like, I think, honestly, to me, Iron Man is my favorite character in the MCU because I feel like he does really go on a journey on a number of those movies in terms of starting where he is and then having a PTSD-like experience and then slowly healing from that and then going in all these different directions. But you're right, that's the exception, not the rule. And with Diana especially, because we know that she, at the start of the BVS movie, is in such a different place, I really wanted to see more of where she goes and how she gets there. And I think the point you make about her being hung up on Steve all this time is also really good in terms of, like, it made me... Wonder Woman established her as such this strong, powerful character who literally changes the world around her. And, like I said, inspires people to fight and to save this village and to see the good in themselves in so many ways. I felt like having her basically be this recluse who's just been mourning Steve for 70 years, I thought it made her feel small in a way. Like, does that make sense?
It does. And I agree with you. It's very... I don't want to downplay, like... I don't want to say, oh, well, she's a strong feminist superhero who don't need no man. And, like, love is a hugely important part of who Wonder Woman is as a character. And I don't want to say she doesn't need a romance, because that's done way too often with female characters, where that's thrown out because there's an idea that it diminishes them in some way. Right. But at the same time, we're presented with this character who and I mean, I think the movie was trying to do something with this, and I don't think it entirely succeeded. But she has everything one could want. She has this incredibly interesting, glamorous, somehow. I feel like working at the Smithsonian probably isn't glamorous, but she has a glamorous version of this really cool, interesting, prestigious job where she gets to work on something that she's passionate about. She's clearly, like, magnetic, and she has... I mean, she's shown as actually quite isolated, and interestingly, she's shown as more isolated than Barbara. But we know that Diana is a person who can make friends easily, that people are drawn to her, that she can form all of these myriad connections. She becomes best friends with Barbara in like 35 seconds.
Right.
And the fact that they're like, but her life is still empty because she doesn't have this one particular man, even though the first movie implied that she had relationships with women before she met Steve.
Oh, for sure.
So the fact that everything comes back to this one specific guy who, again, would have been dead by now anyway if he hadn't died in the war.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like that is diminishing of the character in a way. And the repeated theme of the movie, or the question that the movie asks, is, can you have it all? Kind of, sort of raised my antenna there, because that's something that I normally hear about women. Like, ladies, can you have it all? Can you have the career and the family and the this and the that and be beautiful and put together?
My partner Mary asked, how is it that in 2020 we're getting a movie where Wonder Woman has to choose between her love and her career?
Yeah.
Like, that's a trope we really should have gotten past a long time ago.
And the idea of, like, fundamentally, she has to decide, no, she can't have it all. I have issues with the idea, with the whole ladies, you can have it all thing, because it's a very capitalist framing of, like, if you just work really hard, you can be perfect. Right. You should probably buy these products about it. So I'm not saying that the movie should have concluded that, yes, if you're Wonder Woman, you can have it all. Too bad you're not Wonder Woman. But it just felt like a framing that wasn't thought through very well. And again, because it hit the same, saying goodbye to Steve hit the same exact emotional beat as the first movie. I think that also made it feel smaller because it was like, oh, I've seen this, but that was like Casablanca. Like, that was real cool, and this is less of that.
Yeah, I mean, the sacrifice he makes in that first movie is really beautiful, and you really get the sense that this is her moment of, she loves him so much for that, because what she wants is she wants to see humanity striving to be its best and willing to make sacrifices and do what they have to do to defeat, the evil that she sees quite literally coming from Ares. And the second time around, it seemed to be missing something in that way. Yeah. And I felt honestly, and I agreed. I really want to hear your take, because I think you have a very different perspective than I, obviously. But this is something I got both for myself, but also in a lot of stuff I've read about it from women authors. It just felt like this was one of a number of kind of misogynistic tropes that the movie was falling into, both in terms of, the way that it handled sort of Diana and her approach to, having to lose Steve in order to do the work that she wants to do. Some of the stuff about how Cheetah's journey and Minerva, and just a lot of the dynamics there. It really kind of struck some trope notes that I was like, this is not what I would be expecting.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I just felt in some ways, it felt like, because it was set in 1984, it was a throwback.
Yeah. Is discovering your ability to walk in high heels really the source of superhero power that we're looking for today?
Oh my God. Like, Barbara, you can just buy leggings if you want to wear leggings so bad. They sell them in stores. Like, come on. My sister looked at me at one point and said, she was born in 1990, so she looked at me and said, did they not have contacts in the 80s? I mean, if she doesn't want to wear glasses, it's not that hard.
Well, and there's a scene in particular between Barbara and Diana where, Barbara's talking about how she's envious of Diana because, Diana goes through the world and everyone looks at her. She's gorgeous. She's magnanimous. She's charming. And, in honesty, Barbara is too. This is the Hermione Granger. Mm-hmm. We're going to call this character ugly because we mess up her hair and give her glasses idea. When it's a gorgeous actress playing a gorgeous character, to be sure. But there's that conversation where Diana's saying, no, you're just as good as me. People look at us the same way. I heard the one author I read about this use the phrase "pretty girl privilege," which I thought was kind of fitting. It's this idea of Diana not recognizing that because of, and this is by no means a good thing in any way, shape, or form, but that because of the way she looks and the way she's treated, that she does get treated a very different way than someone like Barbara does. And it bothered me that it bothered me that Diana couldn't understand that and couldn't be more sympathetic to where Barbara was coming from.
I could see a take where Diana just so genuinely sees the beauty in everybody. And I agree, like the whole, this is a completely ridiculous exercise because Kristen Wiig is beautiful and she looked beautiful the whole movie, and this is nonsense. This is so silly. She had like a partial side ponytail for 3 minutes, which it was 1984, so everybody did. I had been born 3 months before this movie started, and I also was rocking that hair. But
sure.
But if we buy into the movie's premise that somehow by wearing glasses and not wearing leggings, Barbara is a hideous troll, then I could see and I could get behind Diana so genuinely seeing the beauty in everybody, and so truly, like, not even at this point with this many decades being in man's world behind her, just not seeing that, because she really does see everybody as beautiful and unique, and is so completely removed from
kind of misogynistic beauty standards that everyone else has to grow up with. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like I would like that take, I think, but that's not what they did. They didn't. Yeah. They just went with the very hackneyed trope of like, look at this beautiful woman. Oh no, we put glasses on her. Like, don't know if you've ever seen Not Another Teen Movie, but they make fun of that trope like remorselessly throughout the whole movie. And so, of course, they have this beautiful woman playing the main girl, and they put her in glasses and a ponytail and paint splattered overalls. And the other characters are constantly like, ugh, she's wearing paint splattered overalls, and then like shuddering.
That's awesome.
So it's very much like, if you're engaging in a trope that Not Another Teen Movie was feminist enough to dismantle, and this is not a groundbreaking film in any way, I just watched it because Chris Evans is naked in it, then
that's a good reason to watch it.
Then, like, maybe you should reconsider what you're doing with the preeminent superheroine in the world. Just a thought.
I think that's what just so surprised me about that. And going further into also DC stuff, we kind of shift to Barbara a bit, and just taking the same kind of theme with the kind of the change of beauty and the like, and shifting to Barbara some. Have you seen the Tim Burton Batman movies, especially number 2?
Mm-hmm.
It felt. I grant that both characters are cat based, but her origin story of how Minerva becomes Cheetah, it felt almost like a shot-by-shot remake of the Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman story.
Yeah. Which was, what was that? The 90s? Was it, or the 80s? Or was
80s,
it 1990s?
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
And, like, really we're going to portray, like, in this day and age, in the post-Me Too era, we're going to show a woman fighting back against a guy who's street harassing, becoming sexual violence, that's the sign of her turning evil. That, like, I get that there was a sort of, like, it became, he's no longer a threat, you're kicking the guy when he's down, it's becoming vengeance, and I see where they're going with that, but I thought that was such a, you had a moment to show her being empowered, and very quickly it became, look, she's evil, she's bad, because she's beating up this guy who was threatening to sexually assault her.
Yeah. Yeah, not great. Yeah. I thought what they did with the character was interesting. So they kind of combined a couple versions of Cheetah, because Cheetah's been around since the Golden Age as like a very old school Wonder Woman villain. And the original version was named Priscilla Rich, and she was a socialite who got really jealous of Wonder Woman. So she developed a split personality, which, I mean, it was the 40s, so you kind of hand-waved that trope. And she, like, put on this cat suit and did crimes. All right, I guess. And it was like her, I think the second one was like her niece, but it was basically the same idea. And then in the post-crisis universe, so starting in 1986, was when they introduced Barbara Ann Minerva, who is the character they use for this. But she's an archaeologist who, like, basically makes a deal with this weird, like, pretty sure fictional god that gives her cheetah powers.
Okay.
Sure, yeah, it.
I mean, you know, I watched Shazam and loved it. We're not outside the realm of possibility by any means here.
It's, you know, it's very silly, but that's fine with me. The part that I was like, oh, I didn't know that, as I was looking it up before we recorded this, I was like, oh, I don't like that at all, was apparently, like, originally the person who, like, made the deal with this god was supposed to be a virgin, and she wasn't, and that's why she went crazy and evil after the spell happened. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that.
Oh, that's some sex positivity right there.
That's no good. And in more recent, you know, because DC reboots every 5 minutes, so in more recent takes on the character, they've really emphasized the idea that she was Diana's friend and colleague. And then she basically got tricked into making this deal, and it sort of corrupted her, and that's why, like, turning into a sexy, weird cat thing isn't a good thing. And there is a certain amount of resentment and rivalry with Diana, but it's much more you're my friend and you didn't help me, and now we've been enemies for so long, and you know, I can't put that behind me as her
Right.
motivation, which the fact that they took the more recent version and then they were like, we're going to use this motivation from 1943 or whatever is like, all right, I don't really know why you dug into the archives for that one. Also, as of Rebirth, Barbara, so Etta Candy has a very small role in the first movie. She's Steve's secretary. And I did appreciate, like, they showed a photo of Diana and Etta, who is clearly much older in Diana's apartment
Right.
in this movie. But in the comics, she is, she's not Diana's age. Diana's immortal, but she's, like, still around and she's young and whatever. And Etta and Barbara actually have a romantic history, which I thought was an
Yeah.
interesting addition. So I know you also wanted to talk about the subtext that
Yeah.
was going on with Barbara.
Yeah, and I'll say this is not as much my lane, and so I'm going to link to some other people who've been writing about it. But I think that there were some who definitely have commented on the Diana Barbara relationship has been queer baiting, and that there was some hope that it would go that particular direction. I didn't see that myself necessarily, but I'm also not the one who might necessarily, so I don't think that means it wasn't there. And I think it's a very legitimate concern, to be sure. And I will definitely say I feel like it was just one more way in which the relationship with Diana and Barbara felt really just messy in terms of the way that it felt like there could have been so many more ways to go, whether it's them developing an actual relationship, which, because as you said, it is canonical that Wonder Woman Diana has been romantically and sexually involved with other women. It's canonical that those things could happen. And so it felt a little weird to tease that. But even just to have them wind up as buddies, like, I kept waiting for the moment when Barbara was going to recognize that Max Lord was just twirling mustaches nonstop as a ridiculous villain, and come back to the archaeology and use this archaeology mind that she has and team up with Diana. And so for her to both be not ever become still in that kind of like 1940s-ish trope you said of the literal cat fight, Marston is a hero of mine in many ways, and I think did some wonderful things with this medium. He was also a man in the 1940s trying to give his interpretation of feminist liberation with a very 1940s cis male perspective. And so it doesn't really surprise me that he would write this villain to have like a cat fight literally with Diana. But it just seemed like all these many ways in which the movie could have decided to make these other choices, to have them linked romantically, or to have them be just buddies who become allies, or just to have Barbara be the main big bad, but to have Barbara be not only the stay bad, but the sidekick to Max Lord also just seemed like not the choice I would have wanted the movie to make.
Yeah, so a few thoughts on that. I haven't read the articles you're referencing about the potential queer baiting, and I am excited to read them when you link them in the show notes. At this point, having not read them and also not being queer, I don't really see it. I think that queer baiting is used very loosely now, and often used to say, like, this could have been queer, or I wanted this to be queer, and it wasn't textually. Whereas, like, the term really means that the filmmakers or the showrunners or whatever specifically teased that on purpose to get you to watch and then didn't give it to you. Like, they baited, and which I don't think that's what happened here.
Mm-hmm.
All that said, like, considering that both characters are canonically queer in the comics and Diana is in the movie universe as well, like, when they have their little dinner scene, I was like, interesting, what's going on here? And then, of course, they didn't do anything with it, which I am pessimistic enough about Hollywood to not expect them to do anything with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they could have done much more with that friendship. The fact that they had one night that they now I'm doing it. They spent one night together. But they spend one evening interacting, and then they like had a fight, and then Diana just starts calling Barbara from around the globe, like, Google this for me, except not, because it's 1984. I wasn't sold on what was going on with the relationship there. I will say I would have been surprised if Cheetah had been anything other than, like, if she had been helpful or had seen the error of her ways, because she never does in the comics. Yeah. So that didn't surprise me as much, but it would have been nice.
Yeah, and I'll admit, I don't know the character anywhere near as well, so I didn't know what direction it could have gone. And I do think there's an extent to which, as I said, I like you, I didn't see the queer baiting necessarily, but I also think it's not my lane, and so the fact that I didn't see it, I think, doesn't mean it wasn't there by any means, and I think you're saying kind of something similar. And that's someone else's discussion, to be sure. I think if we had wound up in the movie that they told, where the whole thing is about her getting over her love of Steve, to have it be her developing attraction and love for Barbara be a part of that would feel like a real betrayal of everything from season one, from the first movie. And so I'm glad they didn't go that way. But I think you could have told her and Barbara story differently, and you could have made it not as much about the thing with Steve, or you could have changed it in some way to include both of those. Because I think to put it into this movie would have not worked. I'm curious what your take on the other side of it okay, so if we have to have her still probably stay a villain, she's not going to kind of team up and realize Max Lord is wrong. Did it feel weird to you that she wound up in the end being the sidekick to Max Lord and that he was the big bad? Yeah,
not really. And I think this is a case where your perspective as somebody who's relatively new to these characters is really valuable because, we have to look at the movie as its own thing. And I'm bringing in my baggage as a comic book fan. But Cheetah, she is a main Wonder Woman villain. She's been around since the beginning, and she's really important. Or the various versions of her are really important. But I've never thought of her as that heavy of a hitter because she's like a sexy cat lady, to be honest. Like, it's like the big fights are with somebody like Ares, who is a god, who has that level of power. And Cheetah is often, and this is also sexism, but is often just sort of like, I don't know, thrown into the Injustice League, and she's doing what Lex Luthor tells her.
She's henchwoman energy. She's not evil plotter energy.
She has big henchwoman energy. Exactly. And like that's sort of what I expect from her, which is not necessarily fair, but it does tend to be what I expect.
Right. And there's a nice dynamic of that it doesn't have to be the man who's the muscle, that sometimes the woman is the kick-ass muscle behind someone else's plan. Like, I can see there being a positive way of looking at that.
Yeah, I think the plot as it shook out made sense to me with, like, the respective roles that those characters filled, but I think I would really go back to the drawing board with the whole plot to begin with. Like, I don't necessarily think that it can be tweaked. I think because of all the issues it raises with, like, this doesn't make any sense for Diana's character, and it doesn't make any sense in the overall DCEU. But yeah, whereas Max is a complicated character, but has had that more global crisis level of villainy,
right,
at the times that he has been a villain.
And I appreciate what you're saying about the perspective, and this is kind of fun because here I get to be on the flip side of where I've been recently. On my other podcast about the Star Wars universe, in terms of the TV show Mandalorian, we've been having a similar dynamic because there are characters that have been introduced in the TV show The Mandalorian, and I think one of the reasons I think I love that show is because a lot of people who are not super hardcore Star Wars nerds like myself have been really loving it. And we have one person on our podcast there who hasn't seen these characters in every episode of the Clone Wars and the TV shows and things like that. And so it's been a fun dynamic to hear, like, oh yeah, what's your perspective on Ahsoka Tano or Bo-Katan if you haven't seen all this background stuff? So I'm glad it's kind of fun here that we get to reverse that. But yeah. You're right. Go ahead.
Oh, just one thing I will say that I really appreciated about this movie, because for a very long time, DC movies did not have Easter eggs, and they didn't have any references to like other stuff in that universe, and they were like really aggressively. It almost seemed like they were going out of their way not to do that. Like I remember there's a moment in, I believe it's The Dark Knight, where there's a car chase and they go past a truck, and it's a circus truck, and
Right.
it's like, I don't remember what it was. I want to say it started with an H, but it's not Haley's Circus, which is the circus that Dick Grayson was raised in.
Yeah.
And it's like, why even have a circus truck? It's literally like going, fuck you, comic book fans. You're losers, and you don't get to have this little thing that would make you so happy. And like, Marvel, meanwhile, when they kicked up their universe, like everything they did was like, hey, fans, you're gonna like this bit.
Yeah.
And
If
it
someone's
doesn't.
getting some weird bit of Stark, it probably comes from Stark. Sorry. If someone's getting some weird bit of tech in a totally different movie, it probably comes from Stark Enterprises. Like little things like that.
But yeah, like why can't Clark Kent be sitting at his desk at the Daily Planet working on a Wayne Enterprises computer? Or like, I mean, if you don't want to take it out of the Superman group of characters, then a LexCorp computer. Or you could go really obscure and make it like Cord Tech, and then it's not going to take anybody out of the movie, but it makes the fans happy. Yeah. So the businessman towards the beginning who like comes in and is like, Max, you suck so bad, and then he's the first one who Max like exploits pretty much. Mm-hmm. Max calls him Simon, and I looked at my brother and I was like, do you think that's Simon Stagg? And he was like, oh my God. And then it was, and we were so happy, and everybody else in the room was like, okay.
Yeah, I had no idea who that was, but it didn't take me out of it in any way. That's a great example of the kind of Easter egg that doesn't say... Because I think the problem with the Easter eggs is sometimes it can become an issue of accessibility. And I'll be honest, I love Star Wars. I'm worried that that'll happen, that it becomes a little bit of, wait, you haven't played that video game from 1996? Well, you're not a real fan. You don't get to enjoy this.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that this movie did a better job of balancing that.
Yeah, it's like you can tell exactly what kind of character he is, and you don't need to know anything more about him, but he's a perfect character from the comics to fill the role of like rich guy who's a jerk and maybe kind of sleazy, and like you don't need to know that his son-in-law is Metamorpho.
Right. Exactly. So let's talk about Max Lord. I don't know Max Lord very well, but he was one of my favorite characters in some of the... He's appeared in Justice League, I believe, and I think he was a fairly regular kind of antagonist, but who might be useful sometimes, if I remember, in Supergirl.
Yeah, I feel like he was in season 1 of Supergirl.
That sounds right. Yeah, I know it was a while ago.
So Max, in a lot of ways, is really perfect for this movie. He debuted in the 80s, and he debuted very much as the archetype of the sleazy 80s tycoon. Like, you know, the
Wolf of Wall Street type.
Exactly, like the blue shirt with the white collar. And just being really smarmy and always chomping on a cigar and always like trying to find a new angle. And he shows up. This is the late 80s iteration of the Justice League International, which is the JLI is my all-time favorite team, and it's one of my all-time favorite comics. And he basically shows up out of nowhere and is like, hey guys, I'm going to be like managing your team. And they're like, we're a superhero team, we don't need a manager. And he's like, too bad I'm here. And they're like, okay. And it's that book is a comedy, and it's like deliberately played for laughs. And so he's this sort of over the top parody, but what that book does so well is it introduces these broad character types, and then it sort of unpacks them. It's like, oh no, this is a complete human being. And he is introduced very much as like, he's really amoral and sleazy, and we see like in his backstory, like he almost murdered this dude to get ahead, and at the last minute wound up not doing that because maybe he isn't all bad.
Right.
And through his time working with these superheroes and his exposure to these more altruistic characters, he becomes a better person. And then there's this big plot line where basically a lot of people find out they have superpowers. So he suddenly discovers that he has mind control powers, which the movie did not do at all. But when he uses them, he gets a nosebleed. And so whenever Max is like, oh, my head, I was like, he's going to get a nosebleed.
Oh,
it's nosebleed time. I was waiting for it.
Uh-huh.
And then he died, and they put his brain in a robot body. So he couldn't do that anymore. And
you
then,
know, as you do.
And then out of nowhere in 2004, like, he had basically disappeared. He wasn't really in anything for like a decade. And then out of nowhere, they had to make a heel turn. Like, he just went totally evil. And he murders the Ted Cord Blue Beetle, who's one of my favorite characters, and who had been like a long time, very close friend of his. He murders him. And then his whole plan is like, metahumans are bad and I have to get rid of them and give the planet back to the humans, even though he himself is a metahuman, which is a continuity error because he actually was a cyborg at that point, but they forgot that. They made him a metahuman again. And so he like, the climax of this story is he takes control of Superman and is going on a rampage using Superman to destroy things. And so Wonder Woman snaps his neck to stop him. Like, she catches him in her lasso and she's like, how can I stop you? And he's like, the only way is to kill me. And she's like, all right.
Oh, that's Max Lord. Oh, yeah, I know that story. And we've talked about it in terms of the... we did a whole episode on do superheroes kill? And I'd forgotten that it's Max Lord specifically who Wonder Woman has to kill. Yeah,
it's Max Lord. And it's interesting because, like, that moment has become very iconic, which I'm like... all right. Like, he's never gotten back to being good or even amoral since that moment. He's been a villain because he does come back a couple years after that. He's been a villain ever since, which is a disappointment to me because I really loved the character. Although there's the comics, the Wonder Woman comics just completed a really fun arc by Mariko Tamaki, who's taking over on Batman. She'll be the first woman to write a main Batman comic, which is amazing. Nice. Long overdue, but amazing. But she did this whole arc where, like, Diana has to team up with Max, who never died because this is a new continuity, but he was able to see into this other universe, this previous universe where she killed him, so he's like, I'm going to get revenge. It's like, she didn't kill you, you're fine. But yeah, he's an interesting character. He's been used in a lot of different ways. And one of the things, they changed a lot about him. Like, he is old money in the comics. He's Maxwell Lord III, which, I mean, he changed his name, in the movie. He does not have a son in the comics, although they did just introduce a daughter, who's also a villain. But I did like that he was redeemable at the end, that he saw the error of his ways and he made amends and undid things, because I have been, like, I thought he was going to end the movie with his neck snapped. And instead, he did the right thing. And I was like, oh, there's my Max. Yeah. So, again, it's one of those things where I can't really separate my investment in the character from, like, how it played out in the movie. So I was happy with how that went, but I don't know if you found it believable.
I had a lot of questions about Max Lord. And here again is a case where we have very different perspectives on it because I don't have the full canonical knowledge. And I want to say I appreciate your saying about the value of the perspective, and I think both perspectives are equally valuable. But I also, like, I admit, there's an ignorance that I have there that I'm really glad you can fill in those gaps. And I think honoring some of that existing canon is important, to be sure, if not being slavish to it. I definitely feel like I loved the Max Lord of Supergirl Season 1. And I just did a quick, like, kind of reminding myself of some of it. You know, and I was right in my memory that he's presented at first as an enemy, but then he becomes kind of a well, we're both on the same side, even if we don't like each other, and that he has some technology that helps him be the only one, along with Supergirl, who keeps him safe from the big mind control at the end of the season, and so they work together. And he had, like, I like characters who are the, yes, I'm smarmy, yes, I'm terrible, yes, I'm underhanded and deceitful, but I'm not as bad as the real person, so you're going to have to work with me. Like, that's a dynamic I love.
I feel like they sort of used him as a Lex Luthor stand-in in that season. Like, because that's a very Lex Luthor thing. Like, I'll let you use my technology to stop these evil aliens, but I still hate you.
Right. And don't you dare trust me for one moment, because I'll totally take... I mean, it's very much like kind of the Loki role that often Loki plays now. And that's a fun character. And I think I just wanted some kind of a team up. You know, Barbara and Diana against Max, or Max and Diana against Barbara, you know, like whatever it was.
Yeah.
I think, though, I just felt like I did like the redemption at the end. I'm not always wild about, I don't care if 3 billion nameless people die, but if it's my son, then suddenly I care. Like, it's nice to see the love for his son, but that felt weird given the numerous times that, you know, he just didn't want to be bothered by his son in the show. Like, he was upset about it's this weekend for him to have custody. I felt like he had the potential to be this amazing character, but in the first half, I mean, again, coming from Mandalorian, Pascal is one of my favorite actors. I think the range he showed. This character is so different than what I've seen him play before that he really sold me in the first half of the movie as this character, you know, who's kind of caught in the 1980s. Unless you're a huge success, you're a failure. And, you know, that dynamic that I think was very common of the best way to love my children is to never be present for them because I'm working for their success. And so, yeah, I think that kind of a lesson of just loving your son and being part of his family is the much better way than trying to have this incredible success. But there's a point at which the desire for success and power he has shifts from being, I want the capitalist dream, to almost Emperor Palpatine, you know, incredible power. That's the word, wrong line. What is it? Whatever it is.
Ultimate power?
Yeah. Ultimate power. Mwahaha. Like, I just didn't believe, once Max has half the world's oil, and it's like, okay, nope, let's do step 2 of the plan. Let's go, you know, take over the presidency. That's what I kind of checked out a bit. Was like, this now feels like a cartoon 2-dimensional villain in a way that I wanted a lot more from.
See, for me, I guess if there's one thing the past 4 years have taught me, it's that there is no end to the greed of some people and the need for power. Like, I
suppose
wish,
that's unfortunately true.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, and I feel like I mentioned this a bit when we did the 100 episode show. I wish, like, I'm not a villain person. I'm not somebody who's particularly interested in villains, and
right.
I think it's great when you have a villain who is really complex and well thought out, and you have a character like Loki or
Killmonger, something like that.
Yeah, or Magneto. Like, those are really rich and interesting villains. But I don't actually have a problem with, hey, I'm just here to get all the money and or power that I possibly can because that's what I want. Like, I'm like, that actually is believable to me because I can point to people in this world who, you know, maybe they have a rich inner life, but I don't see it. Like, what is Mitch McConnell doing all the time? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, I definitely hear you on that.
Yeah, so, like, to me, I definitely see what you're saying, but for me, that sort of went hand in hand with, like, the whole movie. When I realized what the MacGuffin that the movie revolved around was, it felt very, I was like, this is why I said it was kind of like a B movie. It felt like a Monster of the Week movie somehow. It was a movie, but it felt like a Monster of the Week episode of, like, Buffy, or even, like, the Sabrina the Teenage Witch, not the new Prestige version, but the TGIF version with Melissa Joan Hart. Like, it felt like an episode of Charmed or Xena that was like, here's a wishing stone, or Smallville. like, how many episodes of small, like, there's an episode in season 1 with Amy Adams where she's basically the Cheetah character, where, like, that kind of poorly thought out motivation and again, these sort of almost small stakes because the characters aren't growing and you're not making any new points, and it all revolves around a plot device that you know from the very beginning, because that's how it works, that everything's going to be reset at the end.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the minute you see how that thing works, that it's all going to get undone, so what's the point? And so once we were already, like, floating in that atmosphere of, like, oh, this is one of the not-so-good episodes of Buffy.
That's fair.
The fact that Max was like, I'm going to take all the stuff, and here's the, like, they brought in this guy who, I don't know if they said, I couldn't quite hear if they actually identified who the president was. So I was like, is this...
It certainly looked like Reagan. It was a very clear Reagan stand-in.
I was like, is this a fictional president or is it a really bad Reagan impression? Because they didn't even try. I was like, this is a major motion picture. You don't even get a guy who looks like Reagan. We have footage. You could do it. It was that kind of thing. So I was like, I was sort of on board with the silliness of it, both because, sadly, I feel like it's believable that somebody who had access to that kind of power would take it and would not stop.
That's fair.
Yeah, like the theme of the movie that, like, once you have, there's no level that will satisfy you, you're going to keep taking. I bought that, but also the sort of heightened silliness of it.
I guess my phrase that, you know, he has all this money and power, why does he feel like he needs the presidency too? That's not believable is, frankly, actually, no. I have evidence of that exact situation.
Yeah, I can point you in a very specific direction for that one.
But I feel like, you know, that's what I want in fiction. Like, 2020, one of the problems is the victims are so boring, among other things being so horrible and terrible. Like, give me someone more interesting. But I think that helps. I like that idea of seeing it as just kind of like the supernatural or the Buffy, like, villain of the week. Like, it's a MacGuffin. We don't care about the details.
Yeah. Which I don't think it should have been. Again, this is a major motion picture. Come on. Like, what's going to happen next? Diana's going to make a date for the same night with 2 different people and has to run back and forth between them? Like, come on. But since that's where we were, I was like, yes, this is how this plot goes. They just had more money.
I just had this wonderful, like, brain, going off on a total tangent, just knowing the origins of Wonder Woman and all that. Like, we do get some, you know, Wonder Woman has a date with Steve and with Barbara, and hijinks ensue, and it's ridiculous, but they all live happily ever after in a polyamorous triad.
That would be perfect. Actually, I make fun, but that literally is a plot point in the 4th Superman movie with Christopher Reeve, that Clark and Superman have a double date with Lois and the other female character in the movie whose name I can't remember, and it's actually delightful.
That sounds really fun. I think they did something like that with Supergirl as well at some point, but I don't remember all those episodes. And I think that also gets to one of the other things that really bothered me about the movie, and I know you want to talk more about how it fits into the larger DC issue and some plot holes there, and I'm not sure if this is the same one. I recently did an episode about canon. One thing we talked about we've talked a lot about how it can be toxic to be super focused on canon, and that some of the worst fandom is the, like, no, the belt buckle's wrong, you know, this, and all that's such bullshit. The gatekeeping that happens, so terrible, and so often driven by toxic men, to be 100% clear. But one thing I do like that canon can do, and this is a very ethical thing, is explore the question of consequences, you know? Superman shows up in a world. How does that world change? How do things fundamentally change? And how is every movie now set in a world in which different things happen? Superman and Zod have this incredible fight that destroys all these buildings. How does that change things, you know? And I feel like the DCEU has done some degree of that. Not as much as I'd like, but they've at least been trying to. And I know you and I share a lot of feelings about the Zack Snyder interpretation of Superman, and that Man of Steel is not our favorite by any means. But one thing I think that movie captures pretty well is that Superman appears to a world that has never known a superhero, that has never known supernatural events of any kind, and is fundamentally changed by his appearance. And that later movies in the Snyderverse take that on. And as you said, I thought that the MacGuffin at the end was going to be total reset. You know, someone's going to wish that the last week had never happened, or that in some way that all this was going to be erased. But instead, we have a world that now remembers this crazy week in 1984 when everyone's wishes came true, when a wall appeared in the middle of a desert, which, by the way, really racist portrayal of the Arab little plot line there. You know, that this woman spoke to everyone throughout the world and made them all decide not to have their wishes, which, as a friend of mine pointed out, like, some of the wishes are like super poor kids drinking water out of a ditch, wishing for, like, clean drinking water, and giving that so much weirdness. But I don't understand how a world could go through these events and then go back to normal in such a way that Superman can then come along and it be, oh my gosh, we've never imagined something like this. It was 20, 30 years later.
Well, see, I kept thinking about, this is ironic, you're thinking about Superman and I'm thinking about Batman.
Oh, there you go.
But I was like, I looked it up. I was like, how old is Ben Affleck? Because he's older than me. I was born in 1984. He would remember this. And if Bruce Wayne is the same age as Ben Affleck, he would have been 12. And I think we all know what a 12-year-old Bruce Wayne would have wished for.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Bruce would remember, oh, that time my parents came back for 5 minutes and then I had to give them up, which I don't necessarily believe he would have done. Like, I actually do really like the ending in some ways, which we can also talk about. But the whole time, like right from the mall scene, I was like, wait a minute. This was on the news. When Bruce is trying to find other people to join the Justice League, all he can find about Diana is this one photo from World War I when she was on the news during his lifetime. And the more the movie went on, I was like, does he not remember the time there was a giant wall all of a sudden in the desert? Like, does he not remember the time that the U.S. and Russia fired all of their nukes at once and then they disappeared in midair? And it, like, I grew up in the very tail end of the Cold War. I would remember that.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't remember, like, there's historical record of it. Like, it just does not make any sense that the only evidence that he can find, and, like, obviously, like, this is the order that these movies were made in, and like you were saying, you can't be too beholden to canon, and you can't be too, like, if they're too rigidly closed in by what happened in later movies, then that's not helpful. But at the same time, they didn't have to set this movie in 1980. Yeah, well, they didn't have to set this movie in 1984. They could have set it after Justice League. There was no reason not to.
Paul Hoppy, who's my co-host for a lot of these episodes, he and I have talked a lot about this, especially in regard to the Star Wars movies, because I think this has been a huge problem. Prequelitis, that anytime you're setting something in a time period before what has already happened, you always have this problem of, is it going to fit in the larger world? And that especially becomes a problem anytime that some movie or some TV show or some book has said, this was the first time it happened. Because then if you actually want to say, well, but actually this also happened beforehand, you have to figure out some way to explain that. And if Wonder Woman had given this incredible speech and used the lasso of truth over television, which, beautiful, doesn't make any logical sense, but sure,
not
a beautiful scene. Let's go with it. And the result had been that, like, everyone together in the world, in the universe, wishes that we go back 7 days, or something to erase all this from memory. It works. But they don't do that. And it doesn't. I hadn't even thought of Batman, but you're right. There's a tangent, but I think it's really related. In, 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 in theology, which is one of my main interests, we often talk about this question of, once you introduce the idea of a supernatural power who can kind of reach into our world and change things, you know, you then have to always ask the question of, if they can do that, why don't they? Mm-hmm. And so if you say, like, everyone in our church prayed that Aunt Millie's cancer would be healed, and then Aunt Millie's cancer was healed, well, now you have to ask, and you say that it's because of the prayer. Now you have to ask yourself, well, how come every time this other group prays for someone and the cancer doesn't get better? And obviously, I mean, I am a person of faith. I do think there's value in prayer. There's a whole huge theological can of worms to be opened there. That's a very different discussion. But my only point is, I think the same thinking would apply to superheroes. Once Bruce Wayne knows that Wonder Woman can save some people's parents, you tell me that there's a Bruce Wayne who knows that a superhero could have saved his parents but didn't? That's an incredible supervillain right there. Like, that's a great origin story. But it's not how you get Batman the superhero.
No, and I mean, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about, like, this movie does not explain why that mall robbery was the reason that Diana acted. Like, why didn't she intervene in World War II being the first and most obvious, but there were so many terrible things. Like, she is a global superhero. Yeah, like, it raises all these questions that it just doesn't seem to have interest or perhaps the mental capacity to address, because this movie it's not very thoughtful.
Yeah.
And I think your point about consequences is really crucial, because, like, you know, I'm watching it and I'm like, well, this makes no sense, but in sort of an affectionate way, I'm like, this is very silly. And surely Bruce Wayne would have remembered this, and other people would have remembered this. It's historical record. This is goofy, but the fact that, but I'm okay with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't bother me so much. But the fact that it doesn't change how the world operates, I think really comes back again to the part where Diana doesn't grow as a character, where this movie, it feels small because it's treading water in every possible way.
It also kind of diminishes her impact, you know? I mean, if Superman appears and now there are these cults that think Superman is a literal god, why doesn't Wonder Woman
Diana
get that?
is?
Yeah, exactly. She is a literal god.
Yeah.
Which also to say, I want to hear more about what you liked about the ending, because we've been bashing this movie a lot. There were definitely some fun parts, to be sure. Although Superhero Ethics is supposed to be one of the more critical of the various podcasts on this network. But we do like movies sometimes, I promise.
Yeah, but, I had a fun time. It's just...
Not so much the deep thinking, but one little disappointment I had, and I wanted to ask if this was something that is more explored in the comics. I love the Greek god origins of Diana, and I think that's such an interesting part of the story. And frankly, I mean, especially when Barbara is her last name is Minerva, which is the Greek goddess name for the Roman name for the Greek goddess Athena. I was hoping that we were going to dive more into the world of Themyscira and Greek mythology, especially when they mention that, you know, trying to find out which Greek god created this particular wish stone is a plot point, and then we mention that it was created by this particular god of deceit and lies. I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, but it seems like it was created by a god named Decalafreya Ero, who's a god of mischief and treachery, who, my understanding is completely made up from this movie, has no basis in either Greek mythology or comics. Does that sound right?
I, having been a Greek mythology nerd since I was 7, but certainly not a formal scholar, I've never heard of this before in either the comics or Greek mythology. It reminds me more of Loki than anything else, and honestly, it feels very not Greek to me, because the Greek god of tricks and cunning is Hermes, who's a good guy. I mean, as good, they're not really good or bad, but like, Hermes is not a villainous god, and
this is definitely a sort of religious archetype. You see it, you know, Coyote and as you said, Loki, Hermes. Like, it pops up all the time. But yeah, this evil wish god is not what we would get
No, it's not. I mean, again, like Greek mythology, like it has tricksters. Like Odysseus is a trickster, and he is praised for it. Like they rewarded cunning and maybe not deceit for its own ends, but like tricks and cleverness. Like those were valued in.
Right.
I don't know about the society, but you see their value reflected in the myths. Whereas, again, like not so much in Norse culture, which is why Loki is a negative figure overall and Hermes is a positive one overall. Although, again, they're not, it's not like uh, uh, more Abrahamic religions that are like God is good,
Right.
end of story.
Like I know I'm by no means native, and so please take this with huge grains of salt. But again, like my understanding, like the coyote figure is often it's the teacher. It's the I'm going
or
to
a Nancy.
Yeah, exactly. It's I'm going to teach you by showing you the idiocy of your ways or whatever it is.
Right. And I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with being like, here's this tricky god and what, like it's not even necessarily like the way the implication that I got was that this figure appears across cultures, so it's not necessarily specifically a Greek god. And also, Wonder Woman as a franchise has always played extremely fast and loose with Greek mythology. Like Ares is not a villain in
Nor
Greek
does he
mythology.
kill all the other gods. That's not
No,
new take.
and like even the idea that Diana is Zeus's daughter only dates back to 2016. Before that, she was made out of clay.
Right.
And her mom was like, "Boy, I wish this clay baby was real." And the Greek goddesses brought her to life, which I far prefer as an origin because I don't see why we need a man involved in that. But
that'd be nice.
yeah, that was not a retcon that I appreciated.
But I guess to me, it's one more interesting plot line that I was sad they didn't go for. Of I don't know, somehow to have Wonder Woman defeat the god of war in movie 1, and then to defeat a businessman in movie 2, like.
Same.
Why tell us that there's this god of trickery and mischief, and maybe show us that god is inhabiting Maxwell Lord, and so that god comes out for the last big bad fight.
Yeah, or Cheetah, because again, like she was given her powers by a god. Why not have it be that god and do something with that connection? But yeah, no, I agree with you. Like it's a MacGuffin, and it's again, it's a sort of thing that Giles would find in a book in the library, and they'd be like, "Okay, everybody has to renounce their wish," and then Willow would be really sad that she's not cool anymore, even though she's obviously very cool and everybody likes her.
Right. Well, no, but she's a nerd, so Allison Hannigan isn't an incredibly beautiful woman.
Right. They didn't even give her glasses.
So true. Well, somehow I think giving Henry Cavill glasses does not hurt his good-lookingness.
He is just a hideous non-entity when he has those on. Clark Kent, who? What?
At some point, I want to have I don't know if there'll be a podcast or a discussion at some point, but I'm going to have a group of people who want to come on and talk about Henry Cavill as Superman, and then others who want to talk about Henry Cavill as The Witcher. Because I've met very few people who love both portrayals. It's like, no, he's scruffy and gorgeous, or no, he's perfectly, chiseled and gorgeous. One of the two.
Yeah, I like him scrubbed up.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
The true height has been Man from U.N.C.L.E. Henry Cavill.
I still need to see that. To me, it's
good.
The Tudors, where he's like just I love Renaissance, and he's just so gorgeous in that. But
Twink Henry Cavill.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, moving us off of Thirstcast, which actually pulls us hardcore into. Listen to the discussions of The Stand. She's very into the man playing the devil. But I will say about the end, and here's something I think ethically was very positive about the movie. I love when a character who normally saves the day by violence saves the day with their words and their mind. And so I did think it was really powerful that Diana can't physically stop Max Lord. I mean, sort of does with the lasso, but really it's her words and her persuasiveness that is able to save the day and to, conquer evil.
Yeah. I mean, the lasso embodies truth.
Right.
And so even though there is a physical connection, it's the the forcing him to confront the truth
Mm-hmm.
about himself and about what's happening. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I love that it was not about Braun. And you know, they did the 1-2 punch of like she defeats Cheetah, who's the muscle, with Braun,
Yep.
and she defeats Max with her eloquence and her honesty and her sort of emotional courage in that moment. The actual logistics of it made absolutely no sense. I have no idea how she was telepathically connected with everybody on the planet. And like you said earlier, like the idea that like all wishes are created equal and everybody has to give them up, when some of these were deeply selfish or destructive. Like the guy who just wished that his wife, the woman he was talking to, would drop dead, and she wished for a continuation of the Irish genocide, versus these children who wish for clean drinking water.
Yeah,
Like,
that didn't fit
the,
for me.
no, those are not the same. And if the movie had explored the idea of the gods or the dreamstone, this monkey's paw idea that it's like inherently, I mean, that's why the monkey's paw is a short story, right? Like
Yeah.
it can't sustain 2.5 hours. Um, but the if you put that aside, I like that she won not by muscle, and I liked the inherent and somewhat implausible optimism of it. Like earlier, I said I don't necessarily believe that Bruce Wayne would have wished his parents away,
Yeah.
but and I don't think that I would not want a Batman story to end this way. But Wonder Woman is so much about seeing and elevating the goodness in people
Mm-hmm.
and believing so hard in everybody's best self that the fact that she can reach out and speak to everyone across all language barriers, and that everybody around the world, because of her words, sees the inherent beauty in the world as it is and relinquishes their selfish desire for the greater good. Like, yeah, that's cheesy as hell. And it's pretty implausible. Like, I'm saying this in the same recording where I said, yes, I do believe that there are people who just want money and power and will never
Right.
stop. But that's the thing that I want to believe in. And that's the
Yeah.
thing that I think is very thematically correct for Wonder Woman. And even if it's not, even if it's not necessarily plausible, I still like to see it because I want that
Yeah.
to be the world that we're going towards.
I mean, and the first Wonder Woman movie, I think, caught that in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
You know, especially there was so much of like addressing the fact that World War One had been going on for so many years, and everybody was just kind of lost in this like cynicism, and it's all darkness and terrible. And she has this hopefulness, and she has this "let's go rescue that town," and you know, she helps the soldier who's going through his own issues, and she, you
Oh,
know,
it's my favorite scene in that movie.
it's so good. And you know, and this kind of goes back to I think what we were both saying before about the journey that she needs to go on. Is that for her role in Batman vs Superman to make any sense, at some point she has to lose that, so that she can then get it back in order to come back and be the important part of defeating Doomsday with Batman and Superman.
Yeah.
And we haven't seen that. And it just, there's a part of me that had, like, I was so glad you mentioned World War II, because that's part of what I've kept focusing on. Is I feel like there's an amazing story to be told of the person who has this idea that humanity is so fundamentally good and right and true, and that, cause I just rewatched the first Wonder Woman movie, and it's so strong that she keeps thinking, like, the minute Ares is dead, the war will stop. The minute Ares is dead, all of this will end. And then it absolutely breaks her heart when she sees that she kills Ares and they don't immediately stop. And she's grabbing Steve and saying, why? Why? I don't. And granted, it's because she killed the wrong person. She didn't actually kill Ares yet. She killed Ludendorff. But she so fundamentally believes that Ares is what's wrong, and that without the presence of Ares, humanity will be fundamentally good. 20 years later, we see, I think it's fair to say, the a certain pinnacle, maybe not the worst, but like one of the absolute pinnacles of human evil in World War II. And the genocide and the Ukrainian slaughters and the atomic bombs. Like, I'm now going kind of a long tangent, and I apologize, but I feel like I want to know what happens to Diana Prince's optimism when she sees that even without Ares, World War II is still possible. Yeah. And I really wanted to see, like, it didn't have to be World War II, because like you said, it could be any of these things. But I wanted to see, like, what happens when that blow to her optimism happens, but she still fights back, and she's still able to hold on to it. And we got that her optimism is still there, and it was beautiful, but just without all the rest of it. And it felt like so much was missing there.
Well, I feel like there's sort of two directions that you can go to cover that gap between Wonder Woman and BVS. And one of them is she's sort of working from the shadows.
Yeah.
Which I think would be really fun and interesting. That gives you an opportunity to do a lot of stuff, but I think that's more suited for almost a Peggy Carter style TV show.
Yeah.
Where you have these smaller missions that can be under the radar, because it's very hard to do a movie where nobody ever knows the thing that happened. Or you can go very dark. And I saw a headline, between the movie coming out and actually seeing it that was like, Wonder Woman 1984 is very dark. And I was like, that's not what I got at all from watching this movie. But I was expecting some kind of real sort of emotional nadir for her. I was expecting, because that's often where the second movies go, where they really bring the character very low, and then they have to kind of, that's what the end of a second act is supposed to do, and then they regain their drive in order to go into the third movie, which they've already greenlit.
Movie 2, The Empire Strikes Back. That's what's supposed to happen.
Exactly. And that's not really what this movie did. And it just continually begs the question of what about this moment made her decide to put the suit on.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that happens in this movie seems to take any greater context of anything into account. Yeah. Basically, like, it's fun to watch as a vehicle for itself. And like you were saying, like, I think the optimism of the end of the movie is really beautiful. But if she's ending this movie with actual proof that humanity is fundamentally good, then why does she retreat again until, 2016 with BVS? And, like, because some guys were weird at her at a cocktail party. Like, I don't buy that. And part of it, a huge part of the problem there is that neither Batman v Superman, she's only a cameo in that movie, but neither Batman v Superman nor Justice League spends any real time on her interiority or her journey, because they're not interested in that. They're interested in her body and couture.
Yeah.
So there's no, it's hard. I can imagine that it would be hard for Patty Jenkins and screenwriters to figure out how to get Diana to a place that isn't really a place, that it's a big nothing.
Yeah.
But I think they could have made it more cohesive than this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think, like, you talked before at the mall scene. I kind of took it that it was that she's been this kind of secret person who's been just not being seen, trying to stay out of the shadows, but every now and then she, like, when she sees a little girl in danger, she acts.
Can you imagine if that's just, like, she's just always done that?
Yeah.
And people are like, Barry or someone is like, Bruce is like, I found this photo, and Barry's like, oh yeah, that's Wonder Woman.
Yeah, she's been doing that for 30 years. What are you talking about?
Yeah, there's so many stories about her. She saved my mom once when she was a little girl. You don't know about this?
Like, what? That could have been great. Or if you just take out the mall scene entirely, it could have been that we don't have to see it, but she could just, have a moment or two where she says, yeah, like, I used to believe, but then, I saw just how terrible humanity can be even without influence. You just get like a picture of something from World War II or Korea or Vietnam or whatever it is. Not even a war. It can just be like the treatment of native peoples, whatever it is. So that in this movie, we don't even have to see her emotional endear. But we just see her start to climb out of that and have that hope again.
Honestly, yeah, removing that scene would, I mean, it was fun. I liked it, but it would fix a lot of the issues with the movie. It was also very, like, whatever, it's a movie. This is a MacGuffin. I don't care. But, like, the fact that, like, she stopped this thing from being stolen and then the FBI came to her in her other identity and was like, what is it? Like, there are other people in the world besides Diana Prince. But that's the sort of thing that happens.
Matt Murdock is both the lawyer and then the guy who's got to save it. Like that's a trope that we've seen 8 million times.
Oh yeah, Clark Kent is always writing about himself. It's fine.
I'm fine with that part. Let's get to the one more big ethical question that I think is kind of a doozy, and then we can start to wrap up or hear any more that you talk about. So we want Steve Trevor to come back. He does so by inhabiting the body of a person who's already living a fairly full life. Mm-hmm. Diana recognizes this and is like, cool, you're in someone else's body. I'm going to have sex with the other person's body to have sex with you. Mm-hmm. You have the floor.
Yeah, it's gross. It's gross. And it's not addressed in any way at all, but I was like, wait. It was also, I mean, it did take a minute of like, wait, what happened? Who's this guy?
Yeah.
To even figure out what was going on. It was a very strange way to bring Steve back, and honestly, a completely unnecessary way. Like, it's magic. Why couldn't he just show up in his World War I pilot uniform? Like,
if missiles and a wall can be created out of thin air, why can't Steve Rogers' body?
Yeah, Steve Trevor.
So yeah, oh God, okay, sorry.
I'll take Steve Rogers' body too. Like, fine, bring all the Steves.
Chris Pine, Chris Evans, we can have a whole big party. Who knows?
But yeah, like it was completely unnecessary to have that. Like, if they needed to do an 80s men's fashion montage, they can go back to that mall. I'm sure they would let Diana try things on for free.
That was I loved that moment. That's such a nice flip of her now being the one to introduce him to a naive world.
Yeah, like that's the thing. Like, I don't think anybody expected people to come away from the first movie loving Steve Trevor and Chris Pine quite as much as they did. Like, I don't think anybody thought it would be bad, but he was so wonderful in that first movie, and that relationship was so well done, and it was so compelling. And I think they just went, crap, how do we get him back? And very often when that happens, it's not done that well. Yeah. And yeah, like which again is why we have this sort of thin B-movie plot for this movie, because it's clearly constructed largely around how to get him back. But it also, raises this really hinky question that the movie never touches on, which is like, you can't use somebody else's body for sex. It's not okay.
Yeah.
And even that, you can kind of maybe glide past a little bit with the sort of, well, she wished it away, so maybe it didn't happen, but then the guy shows up at the end, and they're like staring at each other in the snow for like 10 minutes, like giggling, and no, Diana, you can't date him. You were creepy with his body. It's not okay. They really didn't let you not think about it.
Exactly. And you want to talk about toxic masculinity? I've seen a number of posts of, well, that guy must be gay because he didn't ask her for her number.
Oh, God.
Which is just one of the most like, it's possible that a guy can have a nice conversation with a woman and not immediately ask for her number, or not immediately think that it's a flirtation, or anyway, that's a whole other rant. But even putting that aside, yeah, you're right. I think the sexuality of it is very uncomfortable, very inappropriate, and never discussed. At least, though, Steve brings up the question of, listen, if I continue my life in this body, then this other person's life just ceases to exist. We have killed this other person so that I can live. And the fact that Steve is the one who brings that up, and she hasn't thought of it, it seems like, until he mentions it, also just seemed like such a betrayal of her character. Because of all the things I could have met, I think there's a lot of heroes and anti-heroes who I can imagine saying, like, if you ask Bruce Wayne, can I put your father and mother back into the world in the bodies of people whose lives will have to come to an end? I think in a lot of versions, Bruce Wayne at least seriously considers that idea for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any other version of Wonder Woman that I've ever seen who would ever consider that for a moment.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah. So.
And again, Steve would have been dead by now anyway.
Yeah, right.
Or very old. Like, not to make light of that, but when he says, I had a good life, he did.
Yeah.
It was tragically cut short, but it was his decision, and yeah.
I mean, like, I've talked about how the Linda Carter Wonder Woman was like 8-year-old me really enjoying, but the Wonder Woman who I've really come to know and love is what I've seen from the Justice League cartoons and that whole kind of the Batman the Animated Series and that whole like extended universe that they had in cartoons for a long time. And in that, Steve Trevor is still a part of the world and a part of Diana's life, but he's like in his 60s or 70s now. And she flirts a lot with other people, especially with, I mean, I'm a hardcore Bruce Diana shipper, and I love that particular dynamic, but whoever it is, in that world, he's not her primary love interest. And so I guess it just really struck me that these movies felt like they had to go back to that. And I think it was just a really unfortunate choice. 'Cause I think as we've talked about, it really diminished all that her character can be.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that the DCAU did their treatment of the Steve and Diana relationship is really beautiful. It's like the whole they time travel back to World War II, which is when she meets him, and it's lovely. But yeah, I mean that's sort of what I was getting at towards the beginning when we were talking about Diana. Again, she's immortal. She's a goddess or a demi-goddess. She speaks every language on the planet. She's traveled everywhere. Like, it's not that I don't think that Steve should be important to her.
Yeah.
It's that I don't think that any one person should be the only person. I also don't think that Etta should be the only friend she ever has. Yeah. She's not
I love
designed that way.
In the comic history podcast we've done, I love the stories you've told about how she's friends with this whole sorority of girls that Etta's a part of, who go off and beat up Venetians and Martians and things like that.
I love them. But yeah, like I and maybe I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here because I am very much like, I don't care how long Superman lives, he will always love Lois only. Mm-hmm. Whereas I'm like, no, Diana, like, get it. Yeah. You're immortal. Date everyone.
I mean, and that could be, I feel like especially from the woman's perspective, we've seen that story a million times, you know? I mean, yeah. Tolkien wrote this beautiful story about a immortal elf woman loving a mortal human man. And that story has been done now a number of times. Mm-hmm. And it's a gorgeous story, but maybe give us something else.
Yeah, and it can add richness to her history without defining her.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, I think we've covered most of the ethical stuff we wanted to talk about for this movie. Is there any other kind of last stuff you wanted to bring up?
Well, we did touch on this, but and other people have written about it much more thoroughly and eloquently than I can speak to. This is, again, not either of our lanes, but the anti-Arab and anti-Muslim stuff in this movie was a
choice.
It was pervasive. It was just throughout, like, the reduction of every Middle Eastern character to a stereotype, and the sort of white saviorness of, I mean, Gal Gadot is sort of conditionally white. It's a complicated issue. And I do, like, I have been seeing the same anti-Semitism cropping up that I saw 3 years ago when the first movie came out, around her. But I do think that there are, like, this movie really just
it leans
did not handle that well.
It leans into an anti-Arab and anti-Islamic, which again, I mean, it felt like they decided that if we're going to do a movie about the 80s, we should have all the misogyny and racism and homophobia of a movie about the 80s. Because I think you're completely right. The portrayal of Arabs and Muslims in this is terrible. And while this is subtler, to have the only... he's never explicitly named, but Pedro Pascal is clearly a Latino person. And it's a Latino portrayal of Maxwell Lord, which I think is great. Let's have more of that kind of thing. I'm really in favor of that, and Pascal's a fantastic actor. But especially in the 1980s, to have a story of a Latino man who is trying as hard as he can to have the wealth that white people around him have, and is willing to cut all of these ethical corners to get to take the jobs and do the... I mean, are you seeing where we're going with this? There's a trope there, and it's not a good one.
The idea that striving is inherently villainous when it is done by people who are not born into that privilege.
Yeah.
Because again, it's similar to what you were saying about Barbara when she beats up the guy who tried to rape her. And this is when we were talking about villains. Often, why I like a villain who is just sort of a one-note, like, greed monger who just wants stuff, because I think too often villains are people who have been dealt a really crappy hand by society and they go evil about it, and then paragon of white male privilege like Batman or Superman shows up and is like, aren't you ashamed of yourself?
Yeah.
Like, that's not always, like, sometimes you do get these really rich and interesting characters out of that, like Magneto or Killmonger, but often you get thoughtless, problematic issues. And Max absolutely had that going on, and I didn't love it.
I'll just say one movie I think that really did that right to me is Black Panther, because such a big part of Black Panther is about T'Challa having to realize the incredible privilege he had that Killmonger did not, and that's a big part of, why they took these different paths.
Well, and it makes it a conversation
right.
that everybody in the movie is having, and they're all black, and they're all bringing a different perspective to this, which is different than having two Latino characters, one of whom is like a 7-year-old, and reducing it to, like, I mean, and that's the other thing that I was thinking about this movie, like, Max and his son are the only Latino characters, and Diana and Barbara are the only women.
Yeah.
There's the Amazon scene at the beginning, like, Max has that one secretary. That's it. And, like, their boss is a woman at the Smithsonian. But again, like, for a movie that's about Wonder Woman and it's about women.
Yeah. I mean, you compare this to Birds of Prey, which you and I did a great episode on a while ago, which is so much more about a world of women interacting with each other and dealing with each other and fighting with each other and allying with each other.
Yeah.
And this is...
Well,
go ahead.
It's the idea of, you have to examine your assumptions about the default. And if you're going to throw a character into a scene, and whatever that character may be, something as small as, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example from this movie, but like a coworker at the Smithsonian, or, a person they run into at the mall, or a person they run into at the White House, or whatever. Thinking about, like, are we just going to cast a man here? Are we just going to cast a white man here? Are we going to think about, like, why we would do that? And can we make this world that we're depicting visually look more like the world that we live in? And it does take overcoming of, like, our immediate assumptions because of what, the media has fed us. Where, like, I think they've done studies, and like, when they have crowd scenes, it's like 12% women.
Yeah.
So of course our brains are broken because we're not processing the truth. So you do have to think about that. And then that extends to thinking through, are we recycling hackneyed tropes from 1984? Or are we actually engaging with what we're saying about Middle Eastern people and Latino people and women who have insecurities about their appearance?
Yeah. Because you're right. It's. I think in all of those cases, there's such a sense of, you don't belong. You're not supposed to be the one here. And it just seemed like it just so missed the mark in so many ways.
Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I'm so glad you can come on and have this discussion with us. I think, between this and Birds of Prey, we sort of hit the very different directions of our feelings on different DCEU movies. I know Wonder Woman 3 has already been greenlit.
Yeah.
What do you want to see from that? What do you want to? What can help redeem this or help? What is the parts of Diana's story that we haven't gotten that you hope that movie explores?
I would like that to take place in the now.
Yes.
I don't want it to be another flashback because it's just going to create more problems. I would like to see more community for her, especially community of women. Just saying, like, I don't want her to have one female friend like she did in the past 2 movies.
Have we ever seen Wonder Woman and Lois Lane interact in the DCEU?
I don't think so.
I think she had some word of condolence at Clark's funeral for Lois, but that's about it.
Did she? I feel like all Lois did in Justice League was cry, which was infuriating. Although I did like that Lois and Martha got to talk. So yeah, Diana on a road trip with Lois and Martha and like Mara.
I'd be all for that.
Would watch, absolutely. But yeah, I want to see her have more of a community of all sorts of people, but especially women. I would like to see her. This is pie in the sky. I understand how Hollywood works, but I would like to see the fact that she is not straight be not just a wink, wink, nudge, nudge line, but like actually have a relationship with a woman that is textual, a woman who has a name, or at least, even if they can't go, like, that would be the ideal, but at least be like, oh yeah, my girlfriend from Themyscira named so-and-so, or this woman I dated in the 70s, or whatever.
Right, show a picture on her wall of her holding hands with a woman who she was clearly close with in the 90s, whatever it is.
Like, just that moment in the Birds of Prey credits where it was like, Harley has a female ex was such...
Oh, he was so good.
That was...
And all it was showing was all these terrible exes she'd had, but that one of them was a woman. Like, it was so good.
That's feminism.
Yeah.
But, like, even then, it's a breadcrumb. Like, more of that, please, but better. Not better, but, like, fuller, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, like, I'm not, like, a super hardcore Wonder Woman person, so I don't necessarily have, like, oh, I want it to be this villain, I want to see these characters. Speaking as a fan of Teen Titans, I would love to see either or both of the Wonder Girls, who are, like, one is, I guess they're both kind of her younger sister. It's complicated. But there are 2 different characters who have been Wonder Girl over the years. And even if it's just like a nod or an Easter egg, I'd love to see them. Just something that really builds out her world.
Yeah.
And makes her less of a solo paragon and more someone embedded in a community. But to retain that optimism and that faith that was probably my favorite part of this movie, as well as my favorite part of the first movie.
I think that's a great way to put it. And, like, the more I thought, at first I was disappointed that in the first Wonder Woman movie, she's really, with small parts from Etta Candy, the only woman. And the more I thought of it, the more I thought, like, no, maybe this movie did need to be this first iteration about her in the world of men, quite literally. But it's 70 years later now. It's now
Yeah.
the 80s, not the 1910s. Like, let's give her more of a well-rounded world. And maybe the first woman who she really has a connection with, she doesn't have a literal cat fight with because the woman thinks she works better in high heels than she does. Like, come on. So, yeah, I think I definitely want it to be set in the modern day. I want it to be, more that interiority. Because you're right. At this point, she has all this backstory on her own. But when she's hanging out with Superman and Batman, she's mostly there to say funny quips and to look amazing as she helps fight things. And I just think we deserve so much more about Wonder Woman. Like, we have so much of the interiority of Batman and Superman. Let's get that with Wonder Woman in this world with them. Let's have Bruce or Superman be the side character in her movie, something like that.
Yeah, like they buttress her plot instead of the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I want? There is a cover from Justice League cover, I think. It might be Wonder Woman. It's the early 2000s. I don't remember. This is a great description. I'm like, it could be from one of several decades and several titles, but it's a very iconic cover, and it's just a close up of Diana's foot stepping on Batman's head. Like, his head is to the side and she's just got her heel planted on his temple, and all you see is her foot and his head. That's what I want.
There you go. I was gonna say, like, look, I'm more of a Diana Bruce shipper, but hey, there's some people who'd put that as part of the ship. So all different.
I was gonna say, whether they are doing it because he pissed her off, or because they have consensually agreed that this is what they would like to do. That is up to Patty Jenkins.
And the whole we're gonna fight, we're gonna fuck is certainly a very well established trope in superhero movies. Watch Daredevil and Elektra, for example, just one example. So
yeah,
who the heck knows?
I'd be fine with that.
So anyway, Jessica, it's always so great to have you on these episodes. I will say, at this point, I've been working harder and harder to try and get the superhero ethics episodes a little bit shorter. You once again, I think at this point, probably the 6 or 7 of the 10 longest episodes are probably with you, which is great because we have so much to talk about. And I always have these 4 or 5 questions I want to explore. And then you bring up 3 things. I was like, oh, no, we need to spend another 10 minutes on that because I never even thought of that. So thank you so much. I love your perspectives. If people want to know more about what you're doing and what you're up to, where can they find more about you?
I am on Twitter at Jess_Plummer, and I also do a lot of writing, mostly about comics, at bookriot.com. I actually have a piece that should be running fairly soon about the history of Wonder Woman costumes, and sort of how they fit into, sartorial history in the real world, and the changes to her character over the past 80 years. And actually, next year, she will be turning 80 years old. So I'm going to probably be putting out a lot more content about her to celebrate that. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled.
Definitely worth it. I've really enjoyed a lot of your writing and highly recommend it. But here again, you've just opened a can of worms that I need to ask about. Am I right that her costume in this is very different than what she wore in the first movie? My sense is that in that one, it was much more Greek goddess, and in this one, it's the red and blue. It's American. She's not using the shield, obviously. Can you talk a little bit about that change? And then obviously she goes into the gold bird woman outfit, which that's a whole other discussion. But just am I right that did I just misremember it, or did her main outfit shift somewhat?
No, they're the same.
Okay, I'm totally misremembering.
What it is? No, it's the saturation. It's the actual pieces are the same, but if you watch this, I put this in the article, but if you watch from BVS, where we first saw it, to the Wonder Woman 2017 to this movie, the actual design of the costume is the same, but it goes from looking completely brown in that first movie to sort of desaturated red and blue and gold.
Okay, that would do it.
Yeah, it is the multicolors, but they're very desaturated. And actually, it's the same costume for those first 3, like BVS. I mean, I'm sure they built new ones, but it's essentially the same costume for BVS, Justice League, and Wonder Woman. It's just that Snyder turned the saturation way down, and Wonder Woman has its sort of medium because the whole movie is kind of sepia toned, and then this is 1984, so they cranked up that contrast, and I do think it is new fabric. Like the colors are brighter. It's not just post-production, but it is fundamentally the same costume. It's just that the colors are much more high contrast.
Interesting.
And then the armor originated in an alternate future miniseries called Kingdom Come, but it didn't have like pants or sleeves, and it had like a weird American flag draped on it for some reason. And then eventually it was like brought into the main continuity as well. And fans refer to it as the Golden Chicken. I'm not sure if that's a compliment or not.
Yeah, I liked the idea, but there again, like, then give us the history of that character. Maybe we'll get that in the third movie. And it's funny.
Yeah. Although, did you see the mid credits stinger about that?
That Linda Carter is going to play her, which I thought looks fantastic.
No, she did. Did you not watch the credits?
Yeah, no, I saw Linda Carter showed up as her.
Okay,
like,
good.
No, I meant that clearly we're going to get that character in the third movie with Linda Carter, I'm guessing, playing a much bigger role.
I hope so. That would be awesome.
And you're right. Like, I'm just Googling now the pictures of her in that first movie, and it looks entirely brown, but I guess, if I look really closely, I see that it is reddish and bluish, but you'd never get that. So, and the shield, I guess, is just in the 1980s, you don't use shields as often?
I guess she just stopped carrying it.
It is a little more conspicuous, perhaps. So
she gave it to the Smithsonian. That's how she got the job.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. All right. Anyway, thank you so much. Just a quick note on my end. I'm doing a couple of different podcasts. This one, the Star Wars Universe podcast. I'm a frequent guest on, or co-host on, PandaVision. We're talking about The Stand. And in order to kind of try to make things a little bit simpler, I've decided that starting in the beginning of 2021, I'm combining all my different social media for all these different podcasts into one, The Ethical Panda. So there will still be different podcasts. If you're just interested in superhero ethics or just interested in what I do with Star Wars or whatever it is, you can still keep listening to those. But there'll now be a single feed called The Ethical Panda as a podcast feed where I put out all the different episodes. And you can also just follow me at The Ethical Panda, Ethical Panda at Gmail, on Facebook, on Twitter. All those will be in the show notes. And that's going to be the easiest way to reach me. If you have questions, ideas, comments on any of these podcasts, definitely do that. We'll be shifting to that. And with this episode, would love to know what you all think. Did you love this movie a lot more than Jessica and I did? Tell us why. Were there parts of it that bothered you that we talked about, that you agree with or disagree with, or totally different things that we missed? Especially if you're someone who has different perspectives than us on the queer baiting issue or some of the racism issues. I think Jessica and I have both been pretty clear that we are aware of those things and we see those things, but we also know what the limits of our own personal lanes are. So we'd love to hear from you about those. Please contact us any of those ways. And Jessica, thank you again. On behalf of everyone involved, thank you all so much. Have a great day.